Hey there, talking through Revelation 13. Again, I was hoping we get through 13 and 14 maybe, but just got through 13 last week. So if you remember where we picked up, we kind of entered into the second half of Revelation. And chapter 12, we met um, the woman and the dragon. So this dragon, we said, is um, kind of satanic figure, Satan, right? The kind of controller of evil here, and how it ends is really how that scene ends. There's kind of a war. He's defeated. He's cast down, and it says that he stood on the sand of the sea. So this we're continuing the same actually image of the same vision, where the dragon is standing on the sea. And then it says in verse 13, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. So we're going to see this beast rising out of the sea in the first half of chapter 13, and then we're going to see a beast on the land. So we see these two beasts. And we talked about how, in our group, we talked about how these beasts help make up kind of the unholy trinity. And we talked about how, and we even see some of it here, that what Satan tries to do is take these things of God and imitate them and pervert them. And it's no different here, where the dragon and these two beasts make up this, I think Ben called it this Dollar General version of the Trinity. So we know who the dragon is. So now we're going to learn who these two beasts are. And we said that dragon represents Satan. And these beasts are kind of the way that Satan makes war against the saints. So let's just start in verse 1. Let's do through 3. And then I can kind of communicate where I'm coming from with this passage. And I saw the beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, and 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. Or let's stop there, actually. So this beast has these horns, heads, diadems that look very similar to the dragon. So there are ways that's very similar to the dragon. And I think that's just drawing a connection that he is like his master. But then he's described in verse 2 as being like a leopard, like a bear, with a mouth like a lion's mouth. And these images kind of draw back to Daniel 7. So if you look, remember we talked a lot about Daniel, that John is borrowing a lot of those ideas. And in Daniel, these beasts represent political powers and empires. And I think John is drawing from that specifically to talk about the Roman Empire, which we've already talked about a lot, how this is a church is being persecuted. So I think what we're getting at here is that that this first beast represents Roman power, specifically like the emperor's power, and I'll talk about why I think the emperor specifically. But what it says after it presents this beast that's like a leopard, feet like a bear, mouth like a lion's mouth, and it says, and to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. So this kind of makes sense if we're talking about this empire, because it's saying that the dragon, the devil, is given this empire, this Roman empire, his throne and his authority. So another reason I think that we're talking about the Roman Empire, like a Caesar type character here, is in verse 3. Verse 3 and the end of the chapter, actually, too. But it says, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. So some people think this is talking about a future character. He's going to maybe be resurrected. Kind of an aside, that idea of resurrection we talked about, this is the Dollar General version of the Trinity, kind of another way that that Satan is imitating what Jesus does and how God operates. But I think what this is getting at here, and I think the readers would have known, is that this is alluding to Nero. There's there was a legend shortly after Nero died. Nero Redivivus. Yeah, I have to Google it. I don't think I know that's not right. But it was this idea that Nero was either not dead, that he was hiding in the Parthian Empire and he was going to lead a Parthian army against Rome, or that he was dead, but he was going to be raised again. So that was an idea in their time, and I think verse 3 may be alluding to that, and I think it's alluding to that partially because when we get to 666, the mark of the beast, I'll explain why I think that's also talking about Nero too. So I think both those kind of combined make me think this beast is a Nero-like figure, or it is a way to talk about the Roman Empire, right, led by Caesar, Nero. All right, so verse 4 says, and they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. Just like we said, dragon gives authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who can fight against it? Right, this makes sense if we're talking about the Roman Empire. We talked about imperial worship already, and this idea that you would worship Caesar, and to say that who can fight against it, right, that is a fair assessment of the Roman Empire. And who could take down such an empire? It is, I think, more evidence for they're talking about not a future figure, talking about something that's going on at the time. Okay, so now we'll move through kind of quickly for the rest of it. Verse 5, and the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. So in verse 1, it talks about blasphemous names. And I think what this is getting at is the names that you would call Caesar were like Lord, Savior. These are blasphemous since these are things we call Jesus. And it says he's allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. So if we remember in chapter 11, so in 11:3, 12:6, 12:14, this time of 42 months or 1,260 days has come up a few times, and we've already said that that is alluded to a time when evil is allowed to reign and triumph, but it's a short period of time, a limited period of time where the church is still operating too. So in this case, it's an encouragement that the beast, Rome, is allowed to reign for 42 months. It's a limited time, and the church is still working. Verse 6, and it opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, and that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And the authority was given to it, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who is slain. So, so this idea here is that they're allowed to conquer the people of God. They're allowed to make war against the saints, and that they have authority over, this beast has authority over every tribe, people, language, tongue, and everyone on the earth is worshiping them. And for our audience here reading this, I mean, the Roman Empire, that was like the civilized world. So it's not too much of a stretch, or even, it's not even really that figurative to say that the entire world was worshiping the beast and worshiping Caesar and the Roman Empire. And it says, where is given? Yeah, so it's everyone who's worshiping is everyone who's not been written before the foundations of the world in the book of life. The book of life came up in chapter 2 also. It's kind of the roll call of heaven. So everyone who's not worshiping the Lamb is worshiping the beast. And he concludes in verse 9 with, if anyone has ears, let him hear. If anyone is taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword, with the sword must he be slain. Here's a call for endurance and faith for the saints. So this is kind of an allusion to Jeremiah where he says something similar. And it's we kind of discussed, it's kind of a downer, right? So it's saying, if anyone's to be taken captive, if that is your what's happening to you, then if you are to be, almost like if you were destined to be taken captive, then you go into captivity. If you were destined to be slain with a sword, then you go into the sword. Go to the sword. And his calls for endurance. So basically, John isn't John's not sugarcoating anything here when he says, some of us are going to be taken captive, some of us are going to be killed with the sword. But I'm calling you to endure and to conquer, in the sense that we've used that word already in Revelation. And I kind of pointed out that this was a kind of a larger discussion, but you can make this argument for nonviolence, really, out of Revelation, that the call here, in light of the superpower who is going to take over and who's going to be allowed to conquer the people of God, the call is not to do battle, but to imitate the Lamb who was slain, Lamb who was a faithful witness. And we too are called in persecution or in trials that we're in, to persevere and imitate the Lamb and the way that he acts and the way he operates. And that gets into chapter 14 big time. So that's kind of the first piece. Roman Empire is allowed to conquer, is allowed to overtake the saints, but it's for a limited amount of time. And John calls them to endure. Now we have the second beast. So that was this beast out of the sea, and here is the beast out of the earth. So the Old Testament, this might be kind of alluding to the Leviathan, which is like this water monster, and the Behemoth, which is like this land monster. They're referenced in Job. So the second beast. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. So this is also like the dragon. It's like the first one looked like a dragon. The second beast also is kind of like the dragon. But he also is kind of like the lamb. So again, imitating the things of God. And it exercises all authority for the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. So this second beast, we said, is the hype man for the first beast. This second beast causes all the inhabitants of the world to worship this first beast, whose wound was healed. It performs great signs, this is verse 13, even making the fire come down from heaven into earth in front of people. And by the signs that is allowed to work, in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make the image of the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So this second beast is doing, one of the children is getting in trouble. I'm not sure if you can hear. So this second beast is performing these great signs, and it is also telling them to make an image of the beast. So remember, if Daniel's in our rearview mirror, we're kind of probably thinking of Nebuchadnezzar, who sets up this statue Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are forced to worship. But so I think what we see from this second beast, right, he's doing these things that are giving kind of glory to the first beast. And where I've kind of come down to the second beast is referring to the imperial cult, or like the priests of the imperial cult. So really talking about the systems that encourage worship of the beast, or of the Roman Empire, of the emperor. We talked about in the past how business was really mixed with worship back then. And if you really weren't worshiping the emperor and weren't worshiping pagan deities, then you are also a little out of the loop when it comes to the business life. So there's like this economic persecution that comes with that. So I think the second beast is talking about the imperial cult as a whole, or maybe the priests who facilitate worshiping the emperor and worshiping Caesar. Yeah. So verse 15, and it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. So it's enforcing through violence this worship. Verse 16, also it causes all, both great and small, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or forehead. All right, here's where we're getting the mark of the beast. Verse 17, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has that mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So this second beast, this cult system, it says it makes people who worship the beast be marked on their right hand and their forehead. So hopefully remember in chapter 7 of Revelation that the followers of the Lamb, the followers of God, also have a mark on their hand and their forehead, and that is the mark of the Lamb, or the seal of the Lamb. And both of these kind of harken back to Deuteronomy 6, something called the Shema. So where it's kind of like the first early creed of Judaism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And it talks about putting the law, writing the law on your hands and on your head and teaching it to your children. And it's really more of a picture of allegiance to God. So in this case here, like I don't think the mark of the beast in this case is talking about a specific microchip that Bill Gates is going to give us or anything. Because I think it's symbolic, just like it is in Deuteronomy, just like it is in Revelation 7, and then just like it is here. So the reason one gets it is, or the one has this metaphorical mark, is because they are loyal to the beast. It is worshiping. It is a symbolic way to say that you're loyal and you worship the beast, or worship, in this case, the emperor and the empire. And you can't buy or sell unless you have the mark, kind of what I alluded to earlier with that economic kind of persecution. And then it says this, that this beast has this number. It's the number of its name. And he says, the one who has understanding, you calculate the number of the beast. It is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So I alluded to Nero earlier. And the reason I think we're talking about Nero here is because of the 666. And especially also because we have other manuscripts that say 616. So Hebrews in this time, and well before, had the practice called gematria, and you could Google this and find out more about it and look more into it. But most people think we're talking about gematria in this case, and what that means is that that numbers in the alphabet are assigned values. So if we could do a really easy example, like if A, B, and C were worth 1, 2, 3, if you put A and B together, 1 and 2, it would equal 3. If you put them all together, A, B, and C, then it would equal 6, right? 1, 2, and 3 all together. And they would, you calculate like names, and give maybe that word or that name a numerical value. And I think we're talking about Nero here because if you calculate out the gematria for Nero Caesar, if you put that into Hebrew and calculate it out, then it equals 666. But if you, or Neron Caesar, that was the way it was written on different coins. But you could also write it Neron or Nero. And it's Nero is 616 and Neron is 666. And we have manuscripts that say 616 and 66. 666. So I think that makes sense because it works with either of those ways that you could spell it. So maybe whatever that manuscript that used 616, they were spelling it differently than 666, but same thing. We can talk about that another time, or you could Google it. There are resources out there. This isn't kind of just some crazy thing I'm coming up with. So I think when we combine this mortal wound that the beast has with the 666 and it being the number of a man, that's why I lean toward this is talking about Nero or a Nero-like figure. Nero was, for Christians, the evilest of the evil. So even if it's not talking about maybe Nero specifically, it's talking about a figure like Nero, who demands our worship and who has other things like the second beast to encourage that worship and force us to worship those things. So I think the Holy Trinity here is Satan, the Roman Empire, and imperial worship, and it really stands as a critique against like a government power that would force you to worship and force your allegiance when your allegiance is solely to be given to Jesus. Right? So especially kind of in this time when you had literal like temples built to Nero or built to Caesar, it's relevant. But I think it's also relevant to us that we would not give our allegiance away to powers on this earth, because there is a lot of biblical evidence, biblical conversations around spiritual powers being behind nations and peoples of the earth. So for us to give our allegiance, really to anything other than Jesus is a concern of Revelation 12 and 13. And the flip side is coming in 14, where we see the Lamb again, a Lamb, 144,000 come up again. But that's where we'll end for chapter 13. Continue to talk about it, but if you want to Google some stuff on your own or look into some more resources, Gematria 666. I'm taking the view that this is Nero and the imperial cult. There are other views we could talk about another time, but appreciate you guys. See you later.